I'm going to be answering some questions. This is from the Booktube Newbie Tag, which I just took these questions in particular straight from Cam's Campbell Reads channel. He did a Booktube Newbie video a few weeks ago, so I'm just following his lead and doing my own. There's a series of what looks like 10 questions, and I'm just going to go through them and give you a sense of who I am and what my channel is going to be about. The first question here is, why did you start this channel? I've been watching booktube videos for a long time. I think I got started with the booktuber Steve Donahue, who is just a superstar on YouTube when it comes to books. He reads more than just about anyone as far as I can tell. And his output is equivalent to maybe like 10 or 12 other booktubers in terms of how many videos he puts out day after day. And so with channels like his, I find myself just watching hours and hours of these people talking about books and just discovering books and sharing books. And I thought, literature has been a big part of my life for a long time. And I'm always finding great things to read. And I would love to share what I find with people. And hopefully meet other like-minded readers who share similar tastes to me. And I have a bit of a range of tastes. And perhaps they can help me find other books that I can enjoy. And I think that would be really nice. One other reason to start the channel is it also helps me think about and have to articulate what I think about the different things that I read. And I read plenty, and I don't always have the chance to sum it up in a coherent way. And it's nice to have those kinds of chances. And this channel is just sort of this push for me to just do that a little bit, to really sit and reflect on what it is that I read, rather than just jumping straight into the next thing. I can process for a bit what it is that I just finished spending hours looking at. The next question is, what can you bring to YouTube? I like to think of myself as fairly open-minded when it comes to what I read. I jump around between different types of books and different genres. I don't need the book to be hugely sophisticated to hold my attention, but I also really like books to be difficult. And so I try to find writing that engages me in a way that feels fresh and exciting on the basis of being novel in that way. I also have a somewhat unusual upbringing. Both of my parents were writers and editors. One of them was a translator even. And then the other one, at an early point in my life, became a successful writer and has since written like 15 books and done very well for himself. And so what that's meant for me when I was growing up is there's this strange transition in my life from being fairly not well off to suddenly being surrounded by a kind of literary world. I remember when my dad was promoting his first book, which is the one that really kind of boosted his career. He took me with him to all sorts of colleges and bookstores, and I was very young at the time. I was like 6 or 7. I think this went on until I was like 9 or 10. We were constantly on tour, and he took me with him all the time. And I got to just be around books as a very serious thing, as something that you could build a life around. And I remember growing up with my dad's library that would go up to the ceiling, and it was almost like that Disney version of a dream library, and I got to have that for a little while when I was a kid. And it's left this mark on me of comfort around books, and also kind of missing some of the community that was there. I remember writers used to show up at our house all of the time, and they would have meetings with my dad and conversations. And even as a little kid, I got to just be there on the margins. And I wasn't disruptive. I was actually quite curious, and I would just listen to them talk. And it is so refreshing to have that memory of people just being earnest in their appreciation of good writing and just wanting to talk about storytelling. I think that all of that is to say that I think my background makes me slightly unusual just in terms of my disposition. And I really want to hopefully find like minded individuals who just want to rest for a bit in the inner mind of books and what they can offer, and the ways in which that every time we read a book, it really becomes a connection with someone else's other mind in a way that we wouldn't get otherwise. And it's a kind of playfulness with imagery and symbolism in the ways that language can entail so much if you let it. And there's something really aesthetically meaningful about that. I hope to foster that kind of a channel that just wants to think about books not with certainty but with a kind of wandering. The next question is, what are you most excited about? Well, I did just kind of bring that up. I'm most excited to find like-minded readers, people who don't mind kind of dwelling in the quiet for a while, who can help me discover other great books that I wouldn't find just passively consuming the booktubers that are out there. You know, I hope that people will sort of get a sense of my tastes and my interests, and then we can help each other. And also just give me insights into things that I've already read. You know, if I review a book, it would be wonderful if people can point out things that I miss and just help me see it in a different kind of framework. And I think that's fine. I think that would be really fun. So that's partly what I'm most excited about. I'm also excited about discovering what I think. I think needing to slow down after reading something and actually reflect on it, and especially needing to articulate it, forces you to actually have to come to not necessarily a conclusion, but some kind of mapping of what it is that all your jumbled thoughts are pointing to. And I like that idea of really needing to be forced to sit down and make clear what it is that this whole book that you just finished reading is about. So I like being kind of forced to do that, being forced to just discuss and discover my own thoughts. Next question is, why do you love reading? Well, there's a lot of reasons that I love reading, and those reasons seem to change periodically as I age. I think one of the most refreshing things about it continuously is just the patience and silence that it requires, which has to be voluntarily sought after, especially now when there is so much stimulation to do otherwise. It is nice to have a hobby that requires that kind of concentration and delivers something that earns the work that you put in to actually focus on it. It actually delivers back to you thoughts that require layers of thinking a little bit deeper, and I think that's worth pursuing. I also love reading because it isn't following the current fashion of thought of the day. You know, there's trends of ways of speaking about things or thinking about things that are very easy to become swept up in online, and that's fine. And, you know, it can be interesting, these various hot takes that take over, but it's nice that books are someone's deeply wound up thoughts kind of unraveling in front of you from a time completely outside of the current trend that you're in. And it's nice to just sit with someone else's conclusions in a different kind of headspace from a different kind of fashion. It is so interesting to read ideas that aren't merely coherent with what else is going on in the current day. And that lack of coherence is satisfying to me. That sort of feeling of something completely out of the blue, something completely outside of the culture, that feels really good. And so I think reading offers me that very often. I mean, especially because I get to choose what I read. So I do purposefully try to seek out things that are a little odd And that's really refreshing to me. Okay, this next one is more of like a personal history. This is asking, what book or series got you into reading? Um, that's an interesting question. I mean, I remember my mom used to read me books all of the time when I was growing up. She used to read me poetry and um, histories and various things. So I feel like I loved reading in that sense. I loved being read to when I was a little kid. And so it already kind of got me this idea that there was something powerful and meditative about reading. And then as I grew up, I think I became far more sociable and far less inclined toward just sitting and taking books seriously. There was a kind of work that books required that I didn't really appreciate throughout elementary and middle school. And then at some point in high school, um, I was assigned 1984, and I know that that's such a popular book, and it probably is like the big book for a lot of people. But it turned out it was the big book for me too. It ended up being one of those things where I was reading the book and it seemed perfectly normal for a while, but there was something that happened about three-fourths of the way through where suddenly it has that book within a book, and that book within a book is philosophical and questioning um, the nature of war in society and how war kind of fuels itself. That I think it was a nod to the military-industrial complex idea, and having that in a work of fiction just pop up, this very simple idea of a nested piece of literature inside of the book. Um, there was something about that that really got me going. It made me think about what books could do, the ways that books can break rules and make us question things and actually shift our mindsets a little bit. That felt to me really powerful. And to get that little taste of it in 1984 made me really curious what other examples of that there would be. I also remember that one of the big books that got me interested in reading, and I don't want to be too specific because I don't want to actually give personal details, but I actually read my dad's book when I was a kid, and I do remember that that had a pretty big effect on me in terms of there's something about knowing my dad on the surface as a father, being someone who's constantly trying to impress upon me a certain image, and then reading his writing and feeling like I was getting something very deeply true about him that was different than the kind of truth that I would get in person. And I remember that had a really strong effect on making me think about what can be hidden in literature that is far harder to put out there in the world in conversation. And it made me feel like there's a space that books carve out that is special and unique, and I wanted to have more of that in my life. So those two books, I think, my dad's book and 1984, really kind of triggered something in me and made me just eminently curious about what's to come. Like, what else am I not knowing about? What else is hidden in books that I haven't found yet? So that was really interesting. The next question is, when did you start reading? Well, I mean, there's those examples of my dad's book in 1984. But even then, I don't think I was seriously a reader. I wasn't like consuming books daily quite yet. I think when I started to really like reading books, that probably happened after high school. And I think it was just very popular book, like it was like graphic novels and things. I remember I read the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman, and I read Swamp Thing by Alan Moore, and I really loved those. I particularly loved the writing style of those. That was very appealing. I remember I got into Stephen King for a while because I had read one of his short stories, and it seemed particularly vulgar, and I thought that was exciting, that literature could be more vulgar than film and television. I do think there's something valuable in and of itself about taboo, and so it was kind of nice to see Stephen King be so taboo breaking, or at least in that very kind of naive way, it felt taboo breaking. So I got really kind of hooked on Stephen King for a little while, and I read like I think like 30 of his books. Um, but even then, I still don't think I was quite serious about reading. I think I really, really got serious about reading when I discovered Vladimir Nabokov, and particularly Pale Fire and Lolita. Um, they both of those books were fulfilling that craving I had from 1984 of the ways that a book can break the rules a little bit. Pale Fire especially broke the structural rules that I thought were in place in a book, and that was really nice. And obviously, Lolita breaks the moral rules. I really like that books can be a space of amoral thoughts. There's something satisfying about books not just following the constraints of social living. Not that you should be immoral in life per se, but there is something valuable, I think, in there being some kind of a space where you get to play with the less acceptable forms of ideas. And so long as you're not directly harming someone in person, I think it's really good to have a space for that. So it was nice to read Nabokov in that sense. And then there was a kind of beauty mixed in terms of his prose style. It was intensely beautiful to me at the time. It's interesting because I thought when I was reading it at the time that it was some of the most stylistically satisfying writing. And then I've since gone back to Nabokov and I actually found it quite stiff now, which is weird to me. I don't know when that transition happened where suddenly Nabokov style becomes kind of rigid and thesaurus-like, but that did happen at some point. So I think Nabokov is when I started really, really being serious about reading. And then I did also discover at one point, and this is going to sound super generic. I know like the booktuber Steve Donahue kind of makes fun of people who read this author, but you know, it just is the case that his books were really meaningful to me when I was young. I did discover David Foster Wallace, and in particular, I started with his book Broom of the System. And I remember that I didn't know who David Foster Wallace was when I first stumbled onto his book. There was kind of a Penguin Deluxe edition of Broom of the System that I stumbled upon at a Barnes & Noble in Burbank. I remember exactly where it was. And it had this particularly strange cover design with like a white bird of some kind. And I opened that book, and in the opening, I think it was the second or third chapter, they have this story about this person who's hugely self-conscious, but they're self-conscious about being perceived as self-conscious. And they're also self-conscious about being perceived as vain, and they viewed being seen as self-conscious as a kind of vanity that they were so afraid of showing. And at the time, reading that kind of a story that was all about the self-defeating binds of psychology, that was really exciting to me. And then I ended up consuming all of David Foster Wallace's work. So very soon after, I read all of his novels and his short stories and his essays. And that, I think, started to really introduce me to more ergodic literature, the more difficult kind of postmodern experimental stuff. And then from there, that was just my obsession. I just really wanted to read that stuff as much as possible. And since then, it's been, you know, like John Barth and Joseph McElroy and William T. Vollmann, who I still am reading a lot of William T. Vollmann, and I love his stuff, although I've already read like 10 of his works. But I also have this, I should mention, I have this habit of just loving an author and then just devouring their works like back to back to back. Okay, the next question is, what questions would you ask your favorite booktuber? There are a lot of favorite booktubers. I mean, I really like Steve Donahue. I already mentioned him. I think the value that he brings to YouTube, in spite of how opinionated he is, I know that rubs people the wrong way. That's precisely what I love about him, is how opinionated he is and how off kilter he can be sometimes. He's really just a refreshing person to have around on YouTube. And I happen to really like Leaf by Leaf, who does a much more serious analysis and overview of books. There's Reed, who I think has similar tastes to me in terms of fiction. And then on the opposite side of things, there's Ideas in a Hat, who is far more inclined toward the same philosophy and economic and just general nonfiction interest that I have. And I believe he's a bit of a of a hardline skeptic, which is fascinating to me. Someone who very seriously is skeptical about all sorts of ideas. And even though I think he maybe goes a little bit too far with some of his thinking in that regard, I do think it's kind of nice having that sort of booktuber around. I want to mention a few more. There's the History Shelf, who constantly just delivers the latest and greatest history books that are coming out. There's the Grim Reader, who turned me on to Margaret Young's books, and I really, really appreciate that. I think she has great taste in fiction. She seems to like difficult fiction and more convoluted styles of writing, which I also happen to like, so I think it's really great watching her. There's No Edit Book Reviews, who really dives into nonfiction and even does textbooks. He did me a favor and reviewed a textbook after I left a comment suggesting that he do so. And it's just nice having someone focus on nonfiction. And what's really great about his book reviews is when he reviews a nonfiction book, he tends to try to summarize a lot of the main ideas. So I feel like I learn a lot just by watching his channel. And then there's the classic Mayberry Book Club, who has a lot of, he looks at a lot of the foundational works in literature, a lot of the classics, and then he has a really nice kind of slower paced, thoughtful style of reviewing that I really, really appreciate. So those are like all of my favorites. And then if I could ask them a question, I don't know. I feel like I know their thoughts so much. I really watch a lot of their videos, so I don't know that there would be anything significant that I would want to ask them. Really, it's just how do you keep up the motivation to film this stuff? You know, I find it tiring just right now talking to the camera. So I wonder what keeps them excited about it. I guess that would be the general question that I would ask each of these booktubers. What challenge, well, this connects directly to the next question. What challenges with starting a YouTube channel will be the hardest to overcome? I can feel the challenge right now. I think it's the silence and the lack of reciprocity from a camera when you're talking straight into, in this case, I'm using my phone, a phone camera. I'm so much more comfortable talking to people. I work as an English teacher, so I talk to people all the time, and especially I'm used to like a classroom of students, and it is really odd talking to the camera, and it feels totally unlike how I usually talk. And frankly, it makes me very uncomfortable, and I find it really artificial. And the lack of feedback is hard for me. I'm just hearing my voice and thinking about everything that I'm saying in a way that is so much more restrained than it normally is. I don't think I think about the sound of my own words quite as much as when I'm in the silence of staring at a camera. So I think that's the hardest thing, is getting used to this. I really do think that there's so much that I want to be able to talk about, so I want to overcome that kind of discomfort, but it is uncomfortable. And I think that's going to be the hardest part, is just getting used to being in a room by myself and talking to myself. That's strange. Oh, okay. The next question is, where do you read? I read right here. This is my reading chair. I have some reference books next to me that I can easily access. I have a little table where I put the book that I'm reading and maybe a cup of coffee onto. And I have a little ottoman that I rest my feet on. So this is my little reading nook right here. And I have the books right behind me that I can just grab. Sometimes when I'm reading something, it makes me want to check out something else that I read and look through some of my annotations and notes. So this is the spot where I would do something like that. What kind of books do you like? I really like books that force me to slow down. I like books that maybe they force me to slow down because they give me a thought I hadn't had before, or they challenge a thought that I already thought I was confident in, or they are difficult in some way where I really just have to concentrate. I love the puzzly aspects of reading. I like being able to have something be printed out on the page, so the expectation is that I'm going to move those pieces together and organize it in my own mind myself. So I like it when literature is a little bit difficult. I think that's nice. It's refreshing. It's not spoon-feeding entertainment to you. It's rather engaging you, and I really want that kind of literature. Of late, I've been reading a lot more nonfiction just because I noticed gaps in my learning, and so and what you soon discover, the more you read, the more gaps you learn about. So I'm just constantly filling in gaps of what I don't know. And of the nonfiction that I read of late, it's been a lot of history, a lot of philosophy, including academic philosophy. I've become kind of fond of the Oxford Handbook series of basically essays from academic leaders in their field on the latest research or ways of thinking about different conundrums in thought. And I know that academic writing gets a lot of hate because of how convoluted it can be, but I don't know. Honestly, maybe it's just the Oxford Handbook in particular. They just seem to gather up perfectly readable but very serious academic literature, and I really like that kind of stuff. And speaking of, I find that I really like textbooks a lot. I know that textbooks aren't really popular, but I find the structure of textbooks really nice. I like the images in a textbook, and I like the way that the structure of the book is organized around learning, around making sure that the ideas are segmented and they have little subcategories, and it just feels really perfect for studying. And when it comes to reading nonfiction, I do try to study what it is that I'm reading. So I think textbooks are really kind of nice. As for fiction, I think I brought up before, I really like fiction that is a little bit unusual, but I do want to emphasize that I don't just want the fiction that I read to be difficult. I also like the deep sentiment that literature can offer. I want it to be difficult, but also very honest and emotional. And I want it to be speaking to me with a kind of intimacy that I wouldn't get from conversations in life. And I really crave that in books, in fiction. I want it to feel like it's dying to get something out. Like the author is just desperate to communicate something difficult. And one of the best things about really good literature is it doesn't need to have answers about things. It allows itself to play with the problems and how complicated problems can be. And by their very nature of being complicated, you're not going to expect or find a straightforward answer. And those are the kinds of problems that are interesting to me. So that's the kind of literature that I like to read. Just things that are a little bit challenging in various ways. And obviously what that word challenging means shifts over time. And so it's going to shift in that way. But in general, I think there's a pretty wide range of what I like to read. I think you might be surprised what ends up showing up on this channel. That is a long, meandering introduction to me. I'm sure you can tell I didn't write this down ahead of time. So I hope it didn't meander too much. And it's certainly a very straightforward look at who I am. Pardon the slight awkwardness, again, of talking directly to a camera. I do still find it really strange. I don't know how or when I'm going to get used to it, but I'm just going to keep trying. And at some point, I hope that I will start to talk like how I usually talk when I'm just talking to a person. And we'll see when that happens. So thanks for watching. I hope you found some of this interesting. And obviously there's the usual stuff. You know, if you like any of what I had to say, just I guess leave a like and subscribe and let me know what kind of books you like. I would actually love it if some of the comments in this video were answering the same questions that I had answered. I think that would be kind of fun. I would like to know about you. And if you happen to also be a booktuber, please leave a comment so that I can find more channels to watch. It's my favorite thing to watch on YouTube is videos about books. So thanks for watching, for checking out this new booktuber, and maybe I'll see you around.